You know, you use it literally every single day. But have you ever really thought about the language that builds the internet? It's called HTML. And its story? Well, it's way more dramatic than you think. We're talking identity crises, political wars, and some seriously cool superpowers. So let's get into it.
All right, here's our roadmap. We're going to trace HTML's entire life, starting with this simple idea of it being a book. Then we'll get into its big identity crisis, witness a full-on war for control of its future, watch it get some incredible new powers, and finally, we're going to pull back the curtain on the magic trick that brings every single web page to life.
So to really get HTML, you first have to understand its relationship with its partner in crime, HTTP. And honestly, the best way to think about it is to picture the entire internet as just this massive, endless library.
This analogy just works perfectly. Think about it. HTML is the book. It's the actual stuff you see, the words, the pictures, how it's all laid out on the page. HTTP, on the other hand, that's the librarian. When you type in a web address, you're asking the librarian, HTTP, to go fetch that specific HTML book and bring it right to you. One is the content, the other is the delivery service.
So, let's stick with the book for a second. HTML. It stands for Hypertext Markup Language. The words you really need to hear there are structure and skeleton. It uses these super simple tags, like one for a heading or one for a paragraph, to tell your browser how to organize everything. It is the absolute fundamental blueprint of every page on the web.
And its partner, HTTP, is the Hypertext Transfer Protocol. This is basically the rulebook for how everyone talks. Your browser sends an HTTP request that says, hey, can I get this HTML file? And the server sends back an HTTP response with the file. That's it. It's the librarian's simple set of rules.
Okay, so HTML structure stuff. It builds the skeleton. Seems pretty straightforward, right? Well, you would not believe it. But that simple fact has kicked off one of the longest-running, most passionate, and, let's be real, nerdiest debates in the entire tech world.
So let's just put the question out there. Is HTML really a programming language? And this isn't just a simple yes or no thing. The answer, or lack of one, gets to the very core of what we even mean when we say the word programming.
This Reddit comment just nails the most common argument you'll hear. It's right there in the name. Hypertext Markup Language. It's for marking up text, not for writing complex logic. For a lot of people, that's it. Case closed. But, of course, it's not that simple.
And here you can see the two sides of the coin. One side says, look, a program has to define a series of logical steps, a process. HTML doesn't do that. It's just a static blueprint. But the other side comes back with, hold on a minute, a tag is an instruction. It tells the computer to do something specific, like, hey computer, display this paragraph here, or render this image.
Ultimately, this whole thing just boils down to definitions. You see, HTML is what's called a declarative language. You declare what you want to see. Most languages we call programming languages are procedural. You describe how to do something, step by step. The debate also brings up this concept of Turing completeness, which is really just a fancy way of asking, can this language theoretically solve any computation problem? HTML by itself can't, but whether that disqualifies it, well, that's the whole debate.
Now, while all the developers were arguing about what to call HTML, a much, much bigger fight was brewing behind the scenes. And this wasn't some philosophical debate. This was a straight-up political war over who would get to write the rules and control the future of the web.
In this corner, you've got the W3C, the established official standards body for the web. And in the other corner, you've got WHTWG, this rebellious group started by the people who actually make the browsers, folks from Apple, Mozilla, and Opera.
So the whole thing kicked off in 2004. The browser folks started WATWG because they thought the W3C was just way too slow and totally out of touch, pushing this super strict version of HTML that no one was actually using. For a few years, they tried to work together on HTML5, but their basic ideas about how the web should work were just completely different. This led to an all-out war. You had two competing versions of HTML for most of the 2010s, with developers stuck right in the middle. But then, in 2019, a peace treaty was signed. The W3C basically surrendered, and the WATWG version became the one and only official standard.
And the core of that whole fight came down to this one idea, the living standard. The W3C wanted to release HTML in versions, like software, HTML 5.1, then 5.2. But WATOG said, that's not how the web works. It's always changing, always evolving. So their standard is a single, living document that gets updated constantly. And that's the world we live in today.
So all that fighting and evolution, what did it actually lead to? Well, while the big standards bodies were at war, HTML was quietly in the background, leveling up and getting some unbelievable new superpowers. It was becoming way more than just headings and paragraphs.
I mean, just look at what modern HTML can do. We're talking about building entire web apps that work offline, handling real-time video and audio communication, storing data right in your browser, even native drag and drop. This is the stuff that turned HTML from a simple document language into the foundation for the incredibly complex web applications we use every day.
And check this out. Here's a tiny, kind of mind-blowing example. If you just add this one little attribute, content editable equals true, to any element, you can edit it right there on the page. No JavaScript, no fancy code needed. It's a small thing, but it shows you just how much power is now baked right into the language itself.
Okay, we've seen what HTML is, we've seen the debates around it, we've seen how it's evolved. Now for the grand finale. How does a browser take a simple text file full of HTML code and turn it into the rich, interactive website you see on your screen?
This whole process, it feels like magic, but it's a very precise 5-step dance called the critical rendering path, and it happens in a flash, every single time you load a page.
All right, let's walk through it super quick. First, the browser reads the HTML and builds something called the DOM tree. That's the content structure. At the same time, it reads the CSS and builds the CSSOM tree. That's the style structure. Then it combines those two into a render tree, which is basically a map of everything that's actually going to be visible on the page. Step 4 is layout, where the browser calculates the exact size and position for every single element. And the final step is paint, where it takes all that information and actually draws the pixels on your screen. DOM, CSSOM, render, layout, paint. And just like that, a web page is born.
So after all of that, the debates, the wars, the incredible technical wizardry, where does that leave HTML today? Well, the thing is, its story is far from over.
I mean, we've watched it go from this basic system for organizing academic papers to the powerful, complex foundation of the entire modern web. It's survived a massive identity crisis and a decade-long standards war, and it came out the other side stronger than ever. And this official statement from 2019 really is the final word. The war is over. There is one HTML standard, and it's the one that lives and breathes and is constantly being updated by the WHOTG to meet the needs of tomorrow's web.
Which leaves us with one last, really fascinating question. Since HTML is designed to be a living, constantly evolving language, what new superpowers is it going to learn next? What will the skeleton of the web look like in another 10 years? That's a story that is still being written right now.